You are listening to the Evolve Your Intimacy podcast with Dr. Stephanie, where it is my goal to educate, enlighten, and evolve your intimacy. You can find me at evolveyourintimacy.com to learn more about counseling, self-study courses, sex, and the retreats that we have to offer. This show contains discussions about relationships, intimacy, and sex, and is meant for those who are 18 years and older. Now, sit back, relax, listen up, and get ready to evolve your intimacy. Hey guys, thank you for listening and tuning in tonight. My name is Stephanie, and you have found the Evolve Your Intimacy podcast. And tonight I have an exciting guest. But first, let's talk about something. So let's talk about some sex work. Sex work has been around since the beginning of time, but the invention of the internet, sex workers have been provided, the opportunity to expand their audience, right? I feel that when the pandemic sent the entire world into lockdown, online sex work just really exploded. As a certified sex therapist, I've had the privilege of working with sex workers of all kinds. Many have told me their negative experiences with therapists, which sucks. And it really breaks my heart to know that this population is so underserved in mental health. So tonight, I have Dr. Theo Burns, and he is a licensed psychologist and is a licensed professional clinical counselor in the state of California. He received his PhD from the University of California in Santa Barbara in counseling, clinical, and school psychology. His professional interests include the psychology of human sexual expression and sexual positivity, teaching and training pedagogy and mental health services, clinical supervision, social justice and advocacy, mental health and wellness for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, intersex, and questioning individuals, and qualitative research. This man does it all. So let's hear from our sponsors, and then we will be right back to meet Dr. Theo Burns. Ladies, are you ready to take your intimacy to the next level? And gentlemen, do you want to add more tools to your sexual repertoire? Head over to our website, evolveyourintimacy.com, to learn more about intimacy, relationships, and sex counseling. And if you enjoy our content and our guests, we would love to have you help us grow. Go to our website, evolveyourintimacy.com, to follow, like, and subscribe to all of our social media accounts. Now, let's get back to the show. Dr. Theo, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to spend some time with us. Absolutely. Tell our listeners, I can talk, I promise, who you are and what you do, and just tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. So I am a professor of education. It's technically a professor of clinical education in the marriage and family therapy program here at University of Southern California in the Rossier School of Education. And then I'm also have a private practice in Los Angeles where I see adults, folks in relationships, kiddos, families, in a variety of different types of constellations for outpatient psychotherapy.
So your book is The Essential Clinical Care for Sex Workers, a sex-positive handbook for mental health professionals. And it's an affirming and sex-positive guide to working with sex workers and uncovering clinical biases, which I think is huge, creating safe spaces, and dismantling the hierarchy, which I absolutely love that word. And we're going to talk all about that in just a bit. But Dr. Theo, there are so many different genres of sex work. Can you provide our listeners with a better understanding of pretty much the different types of sex work that there are?
Yeah, so what is unfortunate historically in mental health industries is that a lot of therapists have only seen sex work as really focusing on one type of work or labor, which is usually street-based and what we often call full-service sex work, where there's sexual behavior involved between more than one person. However, what we also know is that there are many different types of sex work that often get unnoticed. So there are what we would call on-ground locations. So that can be folks that are in person, that are dancing, maybe they work in a brothel, maybe they work at a strip club, maybe they work at a bar, maybe they work at a peep show. There's also what we would call sex work relationships. So people that are sugar daddies, sugar mommies, sugar babies, any type of like fee for service type of relationship for a variety of different experiences. We also know that there's a lot of online. So in opposed to ground sex work, there's online, mostly before like companies like OnlyFans. It was mostly camming, so it was mostly kind of like online, kind of pre-recorded shows. Whereas actually OnlyFans not only does pre-recorded shows, but also gives viewers the option to view or participate with individuals in live time through a recorded medium. So there's a variety of different types of sex work. When we look outside of the United States, we also find that there are a variety of different other types of on-ground sex work. So things like ship work, so folks that are doing work specifically on like ships or barrier barcodes. We also know that there are a variety of different different types of parlors that are in a variety of different cultures. So sex work actually has a wide kind of range.
So, generally when you say sex work, like you said, people think of the groundwork and they don't really understand that there's so much more. You mentioned camming. So can you explain to those listening maybe what camming is? And just tell us what camming is.
Yeah, so for some folks, camming means that I am using either a webcam or an internet-based cam to record myself or to show lifetime some sort of like sexual act or experience that individuals viewing the cam can partake.
Okay. When you were writing this book, well, let me ask you this question. Do you feel like sex workers have do they have specific therapeutic needs, and are therapists dropping the ball for those who work with sex workers, those clients?
Yeah, so my short answers are yes. So I think the specific needs are really whether they really are tailored or predicted by whether or not sex work is the issue that a sex worker is coming into therapy for. So there are some individuals for whom they might enter therapy for the reasons that you or I would enter therapy, or any of us, right? That we may have depression, we may be wanting to process something that happened, we may want to talk about our relationships with like people we work with or our family, and the therapist makes the sex worker's job or career a focal point of the process when it doesn't need to be. So I can think about, for example, if I was like grieving the loss of my like parent or relative, and someone really all they wanted to do was talk about my job, I would feel frustrated and be like, hey, why can't we talk about these other things instead of my job, right? There are other people for whom their identity as a sex worker actually is a big part of their job, and so that could be a big point about why people come into therapy. And so that can be, hey, I want to talk about the risks associated with some of my work environment, right? That can be about how I disclose my identity as a sex worker to my family, friends, and community. That can be about how I learn to set boundaries with people that I work with, right? So all the things that many of us would do for lots of our jobs. And people get really hung up on the fact that the job that we're talking about is sexuality focused in nature.
Exactly. So how did this manual come to life? I think we have a very mutual friend that we happen to know. And as I was reading your foreword that she wrote, Leah, I read her story, which was amazing. Okay, so what I would like for you to do is to tell us why you wanted to write this book, and then a little bit about her story as well and the inspiration behind it all. It's so fascinating.
Yeah, so the book actually came forward in part because my co-author and I, Jamila Dawson, who's another sex therapist in the LA area, we both have done quite a bit of work with people in the industry in a clinical capacity. And some of that is because of our proximity to cities like Las Vegas and like parts of Nevada where sex work is legalized. But also it has to do with the fact that there is a large production of sex work related goods and services that happen within the LA basin. And we had been teaching and doing clinical work for some time. And when we first met, we had talked about the need for there to be that type of work. And Jamila and I are both individuals that I think really like a collaborative writing relationship. And so we would often joke that if one of us was going to do it, we would ask the other one. And so, and also just recognizing that like we are two people that I think really felt as though this was the book that we often wished was there that we needed. And that we kept thinking about how many other of our colleagues who may not have had, you know, a person like the other person, right? So like for me, for example, I always said, I was like, if I was a therapist and I didn't have Jamila in my life, like who would I go to talk about or consult? And so then when the opportunity arose, we just kind of said, this is the moment. And it's hard, right? Because no one is walking around in our field going, oh, I have oodles of like free time, you know? But I think it was one of those things where when the opportunity presents itself, we really felt as though we needed to bring it forward. Yeah.
Absolutely. How does outdated research kind of affect the care and the therapeutic care for sex workers?
So, yeah, the history. So I'll talk about psychology specifically because obviously mental health is comprised of a variety of different disciplines like social work and counseling and therapy and psychology. And psychology is a discipline, which is my discipline. I'm a clinical psychologist and a counselor by training. Psychology as a discipline has a really kind of torrid history and relationship with sexuality. Like we kind of have this Goldilocks approach to sexuality where if you don't have enough, there's something wrong with you. But if you have too much, there's something wrong with you. And it kind of needs to be just right. And if you don't fall into that just right category, we're going to label you as problematic in some way or another. And so the research really actually reflects that bias in the sense that there are a lot of individuals who have interviewed a small population of sex workers who only work in one like city and they only do one kind of job, and they've extrapolated those findings to every sex worker who's ever done any kind of the ones that we mentioned earlier in this interview. And so people then read that research and go, oh, I'm working with someone who is doing this type of sex work and I must have to do these things. And we can all think about what happens when we are included in a group that actually doesn't represent us at all, especially in terms of our mental health needs. And so that's the biggest way that the research, I think, has been problematic. The other thing is that much of the research only focuses on the experiences of cisgender white women, who are a really important part of the sex work community. But also, there are so many sex workers who are trans identified, who identify within a variety of one or more communities of color, who identify as queer, who identify with different ability statuses. And so the other big piece is around how so much information gets kind of like culturally voided in terms of the process of doing that, and that what we're not understanding is how some of the experiences of sex workers get kind of amplified, especially in terms of marginalization by their identity within certain communities.
The research just focuses on what I call genres of sex workers, but how hard is it to really get the information? I mean, it's not like people are wanting to run out and announce, hey, I'm a sex worker. It's not safe in some areas. So is the research really limited by people not wanting to come forth?
So, you know, what's interesting is there have been researchers to speak a lot about this idea that it is really challenging to go into communities and research. But other folks, myself included, really believe that when individuals as part of the communities that are being researched are included in the design and execution of the research, they're likely not only to participate, but also really helpful in framing the study appropriately and accurately, which is why some of the most kind of cited current sex work research is actually sex worker informed, sex worker driven, sex worker led. And so really thinking about more of like a participatory research model than one where researchers are going into communities, kind of collecting data, leaving the community. And then what often happens in those situations is that those that data is usually kind of written up into a paper that none of the original participants ever see, right? So it's actually traumatizing to like go into community, take a bunch of information and lived experience and never give it back.
So are there current studies now that so like if we have sex workers listening that they can participate in and kind of give some of their feedback? I'm not really sure how that works, but I'm pretty sure that you do.
There's actually tons of great ones. So one opportunity that I would really kind of why am I blanking on the word that I want to say in this moment? One opportunity that I would really support, that's the word I want, is one word that I would want is to check out your local chapter of the Sex Worker Outreach Project. SWAP has communities and centers all throughout the United States and is also collaborating with a variety of different organizations throughout the world. So UNAIDS and Amnesty International, the Red Umbrella Project is another one that is also global. And so all of those folks have also places. And I would say a lot of sex worker research that is informed, usually folks within like a SWAP community will know about it or be consulting with it. So I would start there. The other thing is always to think about if people are interested in participating, just to think about like, do they know other people that have participated? Having conversations with those folks, that can be really important too.
So how can they tell if it's a quality study? And I ask this because I'm not always sure if the researchers are using the data for like all the right reasons.
Yeah. I mean, I think a big, like for me, the big piece is what is the determination and why is the study being done? Is it being done to actually further the knowledge about a community, or is it actually just being done to check a box? And I find that a lot of research, specifically research that's being done by people who are in institutions that may not have strong connections to communities, are often being done for part of their own process or their own experience without other pieces.
Okay, so Dr. Theo, as we move forward in this conversation, because I'm really about to switch gears, is there anything you want our listeners to know about research, maybe the quality, the quantity, I mean, whatever you can think of, or just an overall picture of sex work before we move on to the more specific details of the conversation?
You know, I just want to name really quickly that I think what often happens when we see research that we're excited about is we skip ahead to the results part. We're like, ooh, that's a really cool topic. I'm going to read the results part. And what we don't do is we don't stop and go, how is this research actually done? And so I would just encourage, if folks are interested in research that is sex work affirming and sex work led, to acknowledge like how many people participated and who were they? And also from a sex work lens, like were everyone in that study only doing one kind of work, or were there multiple folks doing multiple different kinds?
Oh, I love that. I really love that. Okay, so as we transition, I want to talk about how sex workers can ensure that they're receiving the best health care and how the myths surrounding this sex work, you know, it stops these folks from actually seeking care. So let's break that down just a little bit. What are some of the myths that keep sex workers from seeking therapy?
I think a lot of it, especially as you read in Leia's forward. So Leia Tania, who wrote our forward, is one of the founders and also directors of Pineapple Support, which is an online service that matches individuals who are in the industry with an affirming therapist that the organization has vetted. And she names a variety of kind of myths that unfortunately act as barriers for individuals to receive services. And those can be things like that if I'm in the industry, it must be because I survived trauma prior to entering the industry. If I'm in the industry, it must be because I do not know myself as a sexual being. If I'm in the industry, I've had some sort of difficult experience that may not be traumatic, but may have left me in a really challenging place that allowed me to go there. So there are some myths that actually act as barriers. The other piece that I think is also true is that many times when individuals who are in the industry go into therapy, one of the things that the kind of unknowledgeable therapist will do is create a treatment goal that is focused on helping their client leave the industry, getting them into another job, right? And so if I want to go and talk about my relationship with my partner, but the only thing my therapist is doing is asking me to get another job, I'm going to be like, you are not hearing me, and I'm going to leave therapy.
Okay, so this is some wonderful information and I'm learning so much. But we have to take a quick sponsor break and we'll be right back with Dr. Theo talking about more red flags. Stay tuned. Not quite ready for sex therapy, but you still have questions about sex, relationships, and intimacy? Join me on the first Thursday of every month at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time on SDC.com for a free question and answer session where I answer all of your questions about your specific intimacy needs. If you're not part of the SDC community, no worries, we've got your back. Go to our website, evolveyourintimacy.com, click on the Fun tab, go to the dating sites, and join SDC for free. I look forward to seeing you and your partner at the next live question and answer with Dr. Stephanie on SDC.com. You are listening to the Evolve Your Intimacy podcast, and this is Stephanie with Evolve Your Intimacy, and we are talking with Dr. Theo. Now, Dr. Theo, before we had the break, we were talking about red flags. Now, I know that not every therapist is meant for everybody, and, you really have to search out who works best for you, but what are some of the other red flags that clients can look for or can look out for, should I say, to ensure that they're getting the best quality for them and, that they're with the person that's going to benefit them the most?
So I think the other thing is when your therapist is not willing to do their own research or homework outside of session about some of the things that you're bringing in. So if you as a client are spending all of your session teaching your therapist about some of your cultural communities or some of the logistics to your job, right, that really that session is about you. So obviously you may do some teaching about your experience by sharing your experience. But if there's pieces around the industry, for example, that someone needs to learn, then they can go outside of the session that you're paying them for, and they can do that work somewhere else. But I'm always wary when I feel like I'm doing a lot of educating of my therapist. I can think about times in my own life where I've done some education and been like, I didn't pay to teach you. Why am I here? Right? So, yeah.
So I just want to clarify a bit. If I'm with a client and they use a word and I might not understand what that word means, and I might ask them, what does that word mean to you? I mean, there's so many different terms for everything now, and each day a new one is created, but that's not what I'm talking about or what we're talking about. We're talking about having to legitimately educate the therapist about things that you should already know.
That's right. So if someone is talking to me about kind of like violence in the industry, and you as a therapist say, oh, I didn't know there was violence in the industry, and it's like, come on, you could have done some research and known about that.
Oh my gosh, you can pick up any sort of news media and see the violence in the world, specifically with sex workers. But anyway, and sex workers tend to have little to no access to health care for a variety of reasons, like discrimination they face, fear of rejection, fear of judgment, so much more. Besides pineapple support, what are other mental health options or even affordable health care options in general for this community of amazing people?
So the challenge is that increasingly there's little to no organizational structure related to that. So pineapple support is really our biggest piece. There are other kind of like overarching sexuality affirming places that are not sex work specific, but are sex positive in general. And those actually really differ by geographic location. So I know here in LA, we have like the Center for Positive Sexuality and the Center for Healthy Sex, but one of the things that I often recommend, depending on where you are, is to contact your local, either to contact your local kind of like Planned Parenthood, which often have a listing of some of those places. If there are other kind of sex positive establishments in your local vicinity, many of them will know what those are. If your neighborhood or community has an HIV or STI testing clinic, many of those places will often have some of those. And it's obviously not secure or certain, but those are places that I would normally start. The other thing is I mean, Pineapple is a great resource that if they have a waiting list and you need something immediately, they're often able to refer you, and that's an online service, so you can be anywhere and access some of that information.
Yeah, I work with Pineapple Support, and some of my favorite clients come from Pineapple Support. So they are a great organization. And just to explain a little bit about what they do and how they help sex workers, they help you find affirming counselors in their state, as well as they help the clients pay for the therapy, making it more accessible. So you pay what you can, and then they have sponsors and donors that pick up the rest. And it's such an affordable option for such a wonderful population. All right, so I'm pretty excited about this next topic. In your book, you call it whorearchy, and I need you to tell us what that is, what that means. I need to know all the details because I have got so many fascinating questions I can't wait for you to answer.
Yeah, so it starts with some researchers in the 1970s who began to talk about kind of hierarchy within sex work communities, and they use some like pretty classist terms where they differentiated different groups of sex workers in this hierarchy by class system. And they really spoke about the idea that individuals in a higher class often had more access to autonomy, but also worked in usually certain enclosed locations, whereas folks that were in lower classes, as you kind of went down the hierarchy, individuals had less autonomy, may have worked outside versus inside, may have had different relationships with, let's say, like anything from like a sex work organizer, some people call them pimps, like, so all of those different pieces. Many individuals, as the time progressed, really felt some kind of way, frankly, about this idea related to a class system. And so they began to talk about this idea that there were different kinds of groupings for sure, but that having a hierarchy based on those groupings really perpetuated a lot of discrimination and erotophobia that were in a variety of different experiences. And so a lot of activist communities really rebranded that hierarchy the whorearchy. And that there was actually individuals who were in the sex work community that could internalize that hierarchy in terms of, oh, I may not be as good as, or, oh, I may have incorrect beliefs that I need to have this kind of job instead of the kind of job that I have. So internalizing a lot of stigma, shame, and or discrimination. And so many researchers and practitioners began calling that the internalized whorearchy.
Very interesting. So in your opinion, how can clinicians begin to dismantle this ideology?
Well, I think the first thing to do is to just know that it exists, right? And I think with clients, it's about recognizing that people that didn't enter the sex work industry with that hierarchy, it's learned, right? And that from all of us, right? When we learn hierarchical thinking about groups of people that is untrue, it came from somewhere. So it's about first us recognizing what our relationship as clinicians is to hierarchy and hierarchy, and then being able to kind of with humility and compassion really help clients name it if they're experiencing it, and help them think about where they learned it and what are some of the alternatives to the views that they have. So I think for me as a clinician, the first thing that I like to think about is just some opportunities for reflection or kind of conversating with colleagues in places where I feel safe about where did I learn some of these incorrect messages, right? And that feels very different than the work that I do with clients.
So you just said alternatives. Can you give us some examples of what some of the alternatives might be?
Yeah, so being able to stop for a minute and say, wow, do I actually think that everyone in community A has greater autonomy than community B? And do I know some exceptions to that, right? Or does everyone in community A like their job more than people in community B? And like, what are some exceptions to that? So I think when we start to think about exceptions to kind of the kind of thoughts that we have, we begin to really think about some of those distances.
Okay, so full disclosure, when I heard the term hierarchy, I immediately wanted to know where I fit in on that scale, because I'm just thinking about over my life and how I want to positively reclaim the word or the term whore, what word or term. I know that term hierarchy really means something else, but in my community as well as the population that I work with, I feel like that word that when I use that word, my pineapple people, so to speak, are going to be like, woohoo, tell me more, and where do I fit in on this hierarchy scale? So I absolutely love it. I just can't get enough of it.
Totally. Yeah. No, and a lot of people have, I mean, like many different terms that people use in mental health. I think individuals have been able to reclaim certain types of terms. And I think, there are lots of terms in sex work communities that individuals have reclaimed in a variety of different contexts as a term of empowerment, whore being one of them, to be honest. So.
Dude, the ethical slut, after reading that, I feel like that was a really big turning point in my life. I feel like it allowed me to positively reclaim some negative terms in my life, like whore, slut, all of those bad words that just ruminated in my head. And I was like, they don't have to be bad words. Personally, I feel like ethical sex work is beautiful. It's a beautiful contribution to the world. But however, I'm fully aware that some sex work is not ethical, and there are those who are forced into sex work. I would like for you to take a few minutes, if you don't mind, to describe the difference between ethical sex work and unethical sex work.
Yeah, and unfortunately, a lot of people get those confused, which is why so many people, I think, have anti-sex work bias, because they think sex work, and the first thing they think of is sex trafficking, right? Which is forced or coerced labor where there is not consent. And that individuals often are doing so as under false pretenses or forced pretenses where there is not consent. Which is different than ethical sex work, where consent is actively given and participated, that individuals have an ability to stop an experience at any time, right? And where there aren't threats of violence. So what we know is that the experiences of violence for individuals who engage, unfortunately, sometimes even in consensual sex work, is super high, right? And there are parts of the globe where if you are experiencing that level of violence, you're accountable to the state. So in New Zealand, for example, where sex work is decriminalized, individuals who perpetuate violence against sex workers are accountable to the state because many sex workers are unionized, right? We in the United States don't have that yet.
Yes, I love that. Yes.
And so my hope is that there are other experiences where that happens, but there is a huge conflation with between ethical sex work and also sex work where that is coerced.
So how does the general consumer, like myself, consuming whatever genre of porn that I prefer, how can I know that what I am watching and enjoying is ethical porn?
I think the first thing to ask yourself is what level of conversation have we had before any type of exchange of money for goods or services begins, right? So is there consent? Has there been a conversation about what are boundaries around our relationship? Can we stop or start at any time? Do you feel safe in the environment? And what's also true is, depending on where you're listening, right? So obviously in the United States, as of right now, Nevada is one of the only places where legalized sex work happens, but sex work is illegal, right, or criminalized in most of the other places. But then there are other legal structures related to sex work as well throughout the world. So we know that there are some countries that use partial criminalization and some countries that use the Nordic model. And so just knowing in those terms the importance of the fact that having those kinds of pre-conversations can ensure as a consumer that you are getting ethical sex work, and that also you're treating the individual who's providing you these goods and services with the respect and optimal functioning that they deserve.
So I live in Texas, and it's just automatically, when you think about sex work in Texas, it is criminalized heavily, and they have to go underground and they have to hide, and they have to legitimately, stand in dark corners and put themselves in more danger because, you can get, I think, what is it? They just passed that law last September where it's a felony, like some sort of class 2 felony now if you're doing any sort of sex work. And, that's hard to go to a therapist and be like, okay, so this is what I do. Technically, we're mandatory reporters and whatever. I think that's a bunch of BS. But, so I know that there's that fear coming from just in my general area of the South is where I'm from. But I want to encourage people to, if they're interested in it, to try. And so for those who would like to explore the world of sex, what are your recommendations for them? How would they start? Just from your research, just from like your personal opinion, how would a sex worker start?
So I think a variety of different things that's really helpful is the first thing that I would really recommend is to think about what type of work are people engaged in, right? So I think the first is if people are interested in doing any kind of sex work, what kind? So as we started today talking about, there's so many different kinds. So some people will say, you know what, I'm really interested in doing sex work because I can do it from the privacy of a room in my home while my kids are sleeping. I can record a bunch of stuff, and it's a way to make some supplementary income, right? And so there are a variety of folks that might start in that realm. There are other folks for whom, let's say, they might be really interested in working more in a community of sex workers, so something like a strip club or some sort of a brothel or some sort of a bar. And then that might mean that before you're actually doing any type of work, getting a job in that bar where you may not necessarily be engaging in sex work, but you're supporting the engagement of sex work. So maybe you're a bartender or a DJ or a bouncer, right? And so those are ways that I think a lot of people can start. And then just to know a little bit as you're thinking about it, what your boundaries are. I think boundaries in any conversation related to not only sexuality, but sexual expression, right, are important because regardless of whether or not we think about it, we may be individuals that often don't express boundaries, but that doesn't mean we don't have them. Exactly. And so thinking about that can be super helpful.
I feel like the pandemic, when we all went into lockdown, the whole world, that gave maybe like the OnlyFans. We had lots of moms and people making millions and millions and millions on OnlyFans. I'm a little jealous because I didn't catch that boat. But do you feel like the pandemic, and maybe through your research, I'm not sure, do you feel like it improved the overall societal view of sex work in general?
So it's tricky, right? Because yes, I do believe that OnlyFans allowed people to explore sex work, right? What OnlyFans also did during the COVID experience was allowed people to do sex work in certain kinds of experiences because they couldn't leave the house and they couldn't necessarily see other folks. And so OnlyFans did allow some folks to have some experiences related to that. I think the other thing, unfortunately, that OnlyFans and a lot of technological based stuff has also introduced a variety of legislation nationally related to what we are and are not allowed to put online. And so, which is a whole other conversation, which I'm happy to talk about another time. But those kinds of national regulations have also been super damaging to the online sex work community. And unfortunately, what that's also done is been really even individuals who may not have an online sex work presence, but may just advertise their on-ground sex work experiences using online methods, has made people really fearful. And kind of had to, as you were saying, kind of go into a different realm of hiding at different points.
What's your take on Twitter? Because that is just like full-blown porn now.
Yeah. So I will say what's interesting for me about any social media outlet, right? So there's Twitter, there's Instagram, there's like a lot of different kind of dating and chat sites, which, I mean, depending on the dating or chat site you go on, there's a lot of porn in those kinds of experiences as well. So I guess what comes up for me around any social media platform is just media literacy in terms of how are you being careful? Because what we also know about sex workers is that one of the other ways that information is discriminated against is that information about a sex worker is shared online without their consent, right? And so you'll have individuals who may create content or consumption and then through a variety of different experiences have that happen. Or you may have a sex worker who has an encounter with a client. The client video records or tapes the session without the sex worker's consent and then posts it for money, right? Which happens, unfortunately, to a lot of folks. And so for me, it's less about what should we do. I think a lot of people are like, what should we do about social media? And my response is often, I don't think it's about us focusing on the outlet, because I think if we take down an outlet, right, individuals without media literacy will just find another way to exploit those with no power. So for me, it's about how do we hold and create media literacy to hold people accountable, and we create communities where we're like, hey, that's not cool. And this is why, again, I keep coming back to this. If we had laws that regulated and unionized sex work in the United States, we may be having a very different conversation.
I have so much more I want to ask about laws in the United States. So before we do that, let's take a quick commercial break and hear from one of our sponsors. We'll be right back with Dr. Theo. Do you want to be on a ship with over 6,000 wild and naked friends? Drop an anchor in exotic countries? Explore all the sexiness the world has to offer? Come join me, Dr. Stephanie, on the next Bliss Cruise and allow me to personally guide you to better sex in my play shops, workshops, and private couples sessions. I invite you to come and let your wild and sexy desires become a reality on the next Bliss Cruise. To learn where we are sailing next, visit evolveyourintimacy.com/cruises. I can't wait to see you there. You're listening to the Evolve Your Intimacy podcast, and I'm Dr. Stephanie with Evolve Your Intimacy. We are talking with Dr. Theo about laws in the United States for sex workers. And Dr. Theo, how close are we to having those laws?
We're not close enough. Can I say that? Yeah. No, it's hard. I think a lot of individuals in the United States would have to own a lot of their fear related to not only sex, but about sex as a business, right? And what's so interesting is, and going back to that Goldilocks approach that we talked about earlier, sex is used in so many different ways to sell so many things. Like, so you and I are recording this right after the Super Bowl, right? And the Super Bowl is a great example of how we use sex to sell everything from like nacho cheese to dishwashing soap to cars, right? And so we're really good at selling sex as long as like we go up to the line, but we don't cross it. It's like that Goldilocks mentality. We're like, we can use sex enough, but we can't do it too much. And so I think that in order for us to get to a place where sex work was decriminalized, right? I think it's so important for us to, one, own those things, and for two, for lawmakers to recognize that the legal structures that we have in place, although they are meant to decrease the amount of sex work that happens in the United States, which is its own problem, right? Regardless of whether or not you like sex work or not, the outcome is not the anticipated outcome. So it doesn't actually decrease the amount of sex work, right? Legalization is a trap. It doesn't actually decrease the amount of sex work. What it does is it just forces individuals in the industry to go into hiding and to do riskier things in order to get their clients, right? And so it doesn't decrease the amount of sex work, right? And what we see globally is that countries that have legal structures don't actually see a decrease in the amount of sex work by using those legal structures, right? All we see is individuals that have to do riskier stuff in order to do the work that they need to do. And I just, for your listeners really quickly, I just want to name that there's a difference between legalizing sex work and decriminalizing sex work. And some people get those confused. So sorry about that for not explaining that. So legalizing sex work is where we allow individuals to do it, but we force them to do things like mandated health checks and to register with the state. And that's very different than a decriminalization model where individuals are unionized, right? And that the buyers are accountable to the state if there are incidents of violence or problems.
Which one is Nevada?
Nevada is legal.
Okay. And so, I know that means that they have the health checks and, that type of thing. But are they also kept safe? I mean, are they able to?
So that's a difficulty of a legalizing model. So New Zealand at this time is the only place that has a decriminalized model, right? And so with Nevada, there is a legalized mentality. There's often not a lot of safety, right? There's a desire to help people register and help people to do forced health checks. But for example, like let's say that you don't have enough money to register, right? So then you're fined for not registering in a legalized model. and then you have to do more kind of riskier sex in order to pay off the fine that you got for not registering, right? And also what usually happens is for individuals who are undocumented, it's really hard to register, right? So individuals who may be going through like a migration process are unable to register with the state.
Well, this has been some just amazing information, and I appreciate your work and everything that you've brought to the industry, brought to the world, and what you can.
Oh, thank you so much.
We need more of you. We need more people who can just say, you know what, sex workers are human. We all use sex. We all have sex. I can't say we all because there's a slim or a small population that doesn't, but sex is part of us, and so being able to open up and say, hey, you already do it, so why can't we just talk about it, and taking that initiative to talk about it is exactly what makes change happen in our world.
Yeah, absolutely.
So just talk to my listeners just a little bit about where they can find you, your articles, where they can learn more about your topics, all the things that you do.
Yeah, sure. So the book that you mentioned is called Essential Clinical Care for Sex Workers. It's a sex-positive handbook for mental health practitioners. You can get it anywhere. It's on Amazon. You can also get it directly from the publisher at North Atlantic Press, which is a small press in Berkeley, California. And then my website is just theoburnspht.com. I offer a variety of trainings and workshops, but also do some, as I said earlier, individual psychotherapy. And yeah, there's also a space where if folks are interested or wanting to connect for resources, you can use my website to contact me there.
Awesome. So as we go, is there anything that you want to leave, words of wisdom? I mean, you've given so many tonight. I don't even know if you have any left, but I'm sure you do. Just leave our listeners with something as we go.
I just want to name for anyone listening that if you are involved in the industry, there is a community out there that is wanting to love and support you. And that for some individuals, sex work can feel really isolating and feel really shame-based and individualized. And I'm here to tell you that there are people here that will support you, will get you resources that you need, and can help. And so I know that it can be hard, especially if you've had difficult experiences in the healthcare industry, to feel like those people are out there. But I can just name that, like, having a healthcare provider that might be informed about your experiences and some of your possible needs can make all the difference. So don't give up. We're here to support and help you.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you for taking some time this evening, and I hope to work with you soon in the future. I can't wait.
Yeah, sounds great.
All right. So thank you, sir. There is so much to unpack in that conversation with Dr. Theo, and I just am so grateful and honored to be able to talk with him. I will say that his book, one of his books, is one of the many books that I used for my dissertation, and I kind of fangirled. Y'all know how I love to fangirl, but I was introduced to Dr. Theo through a high school friend of mine. Actually, she's more than a high school friend. We grew up together, and she knew him personally and was like, hey, I know this dude. And I was like, yes, please. So yeah, that's how I met up with him. And so I'm just so pleased to be able to bring that to you guys. Well, guys, there's so much going on. Next session, or next podcast, I should say, I'm so used to counseling, I am going to be talking to you about my new lifestyle, my new life in the lifestyle as a single woman, and kind of explain a little bit of my story and where we're going to go from here, and what great things are coming your way through Evolve Your Intimacy. And yeah, so keep kicking ass, and I can't wait to see you guys. I will talk to you soon. Thank you for taking time out of your busy day to listen to my show. I am Dr. Stephanie with Evolve Your Intimacy, and remember, you are not in this alone, and we are definitely here to help. You can learn more about all the amazing things that we do at evolveyourintimacy.com, and if you subscribe to our newsletter, you will receive free resources monthly to help you evolve your intimacy. Thank you again, and have a great night.